Hello and welcome to Ukraine This Week with me, Benjamin Lee. This is your one-stop shop to take stock of all the developments on the political and literal battlefield. Now let's start with a review of the most important events of the past week, straight from Ukraine.
There was international condemnation of a Russian strike on the Okhmatyt Children's Hospital in Kyiv. Around 600 patients were at the facility when it was struck. 2 adults were killed, including a doctor, and 32 others wounded, with the majority of the children in underground bomb shelters during the attack. The strike destroyed 1 building and damaged 4 others in the hospital. The attack was condemned at a specially convened UN Security Council meeting. Russia has attempted to distance itself from the attack, blaming a Ukrainian anti-air missile. This is incompatible with video of the strike showing an intact cruise missile hitting the hospital. The attack was part of a brazen daytime aerial assault on targets in cities across Ukraine during morning rush hour, killing at least 43 people in total on the eve of the fall NATO Summit in Washington. Poland is helping Ukrainian authorities to find places in hospitals in Poland and Europe so patients can continue their treatment. The Bloomberg News Agency has reported that Ukraine aims to hold a second peace summit before the US election in November. Russia was not invited to the initial summit in Switzerland that was attended by representatives of 92 countries. At the time, Moscow said discussing the war in its absence was a waste of time. Ukraine says this time it could invite Russia, but Moscow said it would not attend the proposed talks, describing Ukrainian preconditions for the discussions as an ultimatum. The UN General Assembly has demanded that Russia urgently withdraws its military and other unauthorized personnel from Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and returns full control of it to Ukraine. The Zaporizhzhia complex is Europe's largest nuclear power station. It has been under Russian occupation since March 2022, and its position near the front line has fueled international concern about nuclear safety risks posed by Russia's war against Ukraine. A total of 99 countries voted for the resolution, which also again demanded that Russia immediately ceases its aggression against Ukraine and unconditionally withdraws all its military forces.
And now let's take a closer look at the situation in the battlefront. Now, the activities in Kharkiv is going to be toned down a little bit as Russian offensive is now focusing on the city of Chasiv Yar. Now, they are going back once again, piling bodies in what is called a meat grinder. If you would imagine Chasiv Yar as a medieval castle situation with a hill on the top and a moat in the front, providing Ukraine with a very strong geopolitical position and a natural barrier to fire down at the Russians. They have been trying to take over this city for the past couple of months, turning their attention to Kharkiv back when Ukraine is lacking in ammunition. However, ever since the Western supply of ammunition and air defense to Ukraine, it was able to alleviate some of the pressure on that front, and Ukraine was actually able to retake some of the positions up north. However, this resulted in the Russians once again trying to push through a ground offensive in the city of Chasiv Yar. Again, as I mentioned, this is a very critical junction point if the Russians want to push forward any further. As we see, there is a natural barrier on this line that is making advance very, very difficult. Meanwhile, they've carried out bombardment in New York, no, not that New York, this New York, and a lot of civilian infrastructure as well as military infrastructure have been bombarded, signaling the possibility of a more push on this front. Now, in the Kherson region, we also saw some Russian movements over there. Even though the fighting is very intense, things seem to be stuck in a stalemate. The takeaway from this map on this week is that Chasiv Yar might be seeing a little bit of a, difficult situation, let's put it this way, when it comes to Ukraine's defense, as they've been able to hold out relatively well for the past couple of months. However, the advancement towards the New York direction, towards the Turex direction, make it so that it's more possible that the Russians will be able to flank them from the side. And this is going to be very dangerous going forward. So far, Ukraine has been able to utilize drones and firing from an advantageous position, but that might change as Russians throw more and more bodies into the battlefront. But as the situation continues to develop, we'll bring you an update next week. And now I invite you to our first conversation with Gary Taparch, former Chief of Staff of the NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow, in which we will touch on the Polish-Ukrainian Security Agreement. But before that, however, let's take a look at a brief introduction to set the stage.
President Zelensky and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk sign a security agreement in Warsaw that, among other things, creates a volunteer fighting force for Ukrainians living in Poland.
We've agreed in our security agreement upon forming and preparing a Ukrainian legion on the territory of Poland, a new military unit consisting of volunteers. We have positive experience with the Ukrainian Polish-Lithuanian Brigade. Based on this experience, we give an opportunity to Ukrainian citizens that are in Poland, Lithuania and other countries of the European Union to voluntarily join in defending Ukraine.
Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski revealed that several thousand Ukrainians had signed up after the announcement. As Russia continues to target Ukraine's power generation, Donald Tusk presented an energy support plan for Ukraine to guarantee electricity supply during the winter. The security agreement also covered, among many things, cooperation in the arms industry, the fight against corruption in the Ukrainian army, the protection of critical infrastructure, and countering the spread of disinformation. Tusk said the 10-year agreement was more than a declaration of goodwill, and set out commitments that Poland will honour to help Ukraine fight its war with Russia.
And hello, Gary. Welcome to TVP World Ukraine this week. Good to have you back again.
Thank you, Bentley. It's always great to be on TVP.
Right. So we're taking a look at this, significant agreement of security cooperation between Poland and Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainian president himself calls this a very ambitious plan, as it does seem pretty beneficial to one side of the party. Can you help us understand and unpack just how ambitious of a plan we're actually looking at?
Well, I tend to agree with President Zelensky on it. It is very ambitious. There are a lot of things going, including anti-terrorism, including training, including exchange of experiences, and including disinformation acts. All kinds of things there, including the weapons development and joint ventures. This is, I think, even if 50% of it would be fulfilled, I still think it would be a great deal of local, regional security to include Poland in it. It won't be just for Ukraine. And as when I was stationed in Poland, I knew that the concern of many Polish citizens was that what's going to happen to Ukraine. There's too much influence, Russian influence in Ukraine, and it was of great concern to the Polish people, which I think they're now expressing in that agreement. I will never get tired enough to repeat that Poland is the best strategic ally of Ukraine. Poland is one of the pivotal or key countries in NATO and European Union, and it has proven to be one. So Ukrainians don't have a better friend than Poland, in short.
Right, and like you mentioned, Poland is a pillar of the NATO military alliance. So this draws me to the whether or not there's a possibility of this training being able to enhance Ukraine's interoperability within the NATO system. In other words, do you think that these training will actually help Ukraine down the line, not just with this current situation in Russia, but maybe make it more uniform to eventually join NATO if that's the aspiration?
Absolutely. Again, I know you guys always mention that I was chief of staff for the NATO representation in Moscow in Russia, but I'm also very honored that I was part of a great team in the early 2000s that transferred and converted Ukrainian military to the NATO standards, including bringing F-16s, the original F-16s, to Poland. So anytime you have this kind of exercises, anytime you have a joint ventures or joint training, that not only helps you to get closer to NATO, but it's also the compatibility between the forces. So they know what you're doing and you know what they're doing, and you become this one part of the bigger machine that understands how the other parts of that machine function. So this is why the training and exercises, that's what they're intended to. So everything works smoothly. Of course, in the wartime and the fog of war, things don't work out smoothly. But nowadays, Ukraine is probably the only country that has the most experience to fight the Russians. I almost said the Soviets, but the Russians. And I think that is the experience that cannot be ignored by any of the countries, including the United States. So I think it is very, very beneficial for Ukrainians and for the rest of us in the NATO alliance.
All right, very much so. Like we were mentioning earlier, there were talks about this deal being very unilateral, which means Ukraine mostly stands to benefit. But I think you rightfully pointed out the fact that the experience of having dealt with Russian forces for such an extended amount of time would actually be able to also benefit the rest of NATO as well. That is something that is, of course, going to be very beneficial going forward. But I can't help but also look at the organizational aspect of this. Like you mentioned, even if this whole plan, only 50% of it is carried out, it's still going to be very ambitious and very amazing already. However, organizationally, do you see that being a hurdle, being able to coordinate all of that?
Yes, of course. Primarily, as always, it's going to be the funds. Who's going to finance all those things? Because some of them are extremely expensive. Some of them are, friendly, and we just fly over and shake hands and award medals to each other. But some of those projects that are in this agreement are very expensive. So who's going to put up the bill? And I think it would be unfair if only Poland pays for it, because again, my strong belief, Ukrainians paying the highest price to keep this evil and this culture of death from the rest of us, but the rest of us need to take a more active role in it, such as Poland does. Follow the Polish example or Polish lead in this. So who's going to pay for it? And second, of course, it's going to be that some of the countries or the administrations of those countries are not will be afraid, or will say, okay, well, we don't want to escalate because this is part of the escalation. This is part of the thing that will upset Putin, and he's going to be more aggressive. We want to scale it down. We want to calm that down. So there's going to be pressure on Poland to pull, to rein that back. So that's going to be a second one. So one is financial, I see right now, and the other one is going to be a political one, where, the weak leaders will try to prevent Poland to show such ambitious, as you put down, plan. So, but I'm sure there's going to be other obstacles, as always, in politics and in the military operations. There are always things that, as we say, Murphy's Law. I mean, some things will come up we don't expect to come up, or some countries to act the way we don't expect them to act. So we'll see. Like, in the beginning of the war, Poles right away offered their MiGs to Ukraine, and yet then our administration in the United States put the kibosh on it and said no MiGs for Ukraine, and Poland had to step back. So there's a lot of pressures when you're in this, what I call a collective farm and a kolkhoz, such as NATO, United Nations, European Union, and it is what it is. It's a collective decisions. It's a collective living. Like in a condominium. So you have to sometimes obey by the rules that somebody else set up.
Right, and sometimes pay the administration fee too as well. And of course, we're talking about some countries wanting to avoid a little bit of escalation that could be due to political reason. It could actually be even due to economical reasons. One could very much affect the other. How do you see this negotiation going forward?
Well, again, I don't see, because you're speaking to a military man who's right now in Ukraine. I witness Ukrainians being murdered every day, children, women, civilian population, destruction of infrastructure. For instance, right now there's no electricity for days already. For a couple of hours they put it on. And the heat is exhaustive. So older people suffering a great deal, kids, sick people suffer a great deal from it. the country is paralyzed because you can't function without electricity. So I think that the way to negotiate is to say, listen, you're going to stand by and watch the nation be destroyed. You're going to stand by and watch another ghetto, except on the size of a country, being killed, innocent people being killed by another Hitler of Europe. We can't do that. Not even, and as you say, there's a lot of politics and there are economical interests in it. But we also have to consider how can I say it, something that is humane, something that we have to be responsible for, take a responsibility for something that is maybe does not belong to us, or it's not our children or our people, but we shouldn't stand by and watch somebody being killed because it may raise the price of gas in the winter for our homes. It shouldn't be. There should be compassion also taken into consideration, and an unfair fight. I guess that's my view.
All right, the Western alliance were formed under the value of protecting this democratic freedom in the first place anyway. So it is, like you said, very important to uphold that. We do see, however, a lot of geopolitical earthquake when it comes to these Western allies, and we might also be looking down on some changes in Washington, D.C. Are you more optimistic about this project being able to be carried out at least to some level of capacity going forward?
You mean if our administration changes? Is that what you're insinuating?
There's that, and also we've seen some administration already kind of changing throughout all the Western allies. What's the general atmosphere when it comes to the support of Ukraine? Do you see a great shift, or do you think the new administration in countries such as France, the European Parliament, would also kind of stay on the same path?
Well, I think that that I can only judge from what already happened. I know that there was a lot of, that one part of what I've studied of Russian or Soviet disinformation is a fear. They scare you. They scare you that the changes are going to come, and what are we going to do without Comrade Stalin, or what are we going to do without Castro, or the NATO is at our borders, the enemy at the gate, and things like that. And they continue to do that. And the latest one was with the president of Italy. If the right forces of Italy are going to come to power, and the Ukraine is not going to be helped, and Ukrainians were very concerned with it, but we see the opposite. So when the new president of Ukraine, she took over, all of a sudden, first thing she demanded is more help for Ukraine, more weapons for Ukraine. So in the United States, things haven't changed really much, because we have a lot of people don't see it or don't understand that in the United States, the president is the president, but the American people is the Congress. And the Congress, from the very, very beginning of the war, actually from 2014, when the United States Congress authorized lethal weapons for Ukraine, the Obama administration put a veto on it and embargo, so the Ukrainians couldn't even purchase weapons from anyone, lethal weapons. So now, the American people, the Congress, wanted land lease. Now the ATACMS with this package, which is $61 billion package, the latest one that was voted in by our Congress. So we have a clash in my country, in the United States. We have a clash between the people, the Congress, and the White House. And the White House, for some reason, is not delivering and is not providing what is demanded by law, because the land lease and the $61 billion and the ATACMS and all these other things are voted by Congress, which means it is the law of the United States, which of course the president has the right to veto. And this is what the White House is doing. So are they changing? I don't see it, because we still don't have anti-missile defenses in Ukraine. Why isn't that we don't have anti-missile defenses in Ukraine? Again, there's supposed to be some Patriots coming in. There are 3 batteries of Patriots or 4 batteries of Patriots here in Ukraine. Another one's supposed to be coming from Greece. And I don't understand that, because we have plenty of Patriots in our country. Same thing with the F-16s. They're supposed to be coming less spring, less summer, less winter. Now it's the end of this summer. And again, they're coming from Denmark and Netherlands. Why? we're taking F-16s off of our stocks. They're not anymore on active duty. So why can't we provide F-16s? So all these questions that I have, and again, why can't we provide Patriots and missile defense? Again, to compare it, Israel has 13 batteries of Patriots, including their own Iron Dome and other anti-missile defenses in a country that is the size of Kiev, the Kiev region, which is small. And Ukraine, this huge European country, has 4 batteries. And that's why the Russians, of course, are bombarding and destroying and wiping off the cities off the face of the earth in Ukraine. And we're not providing what is needed and what was promised and what was demanded by the American people. So it is strange. It is very, very strange why my administration in the United States acting like that.
Right, so it does seem like even though this joint project does shine a little bit of light, the logistics and carrying it out is still going to be a challenge going forward. So we'll have to see what happens. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your input and insight. Thanks again for being with us on Ukraine this week. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Now join us now for our second conversation, in which we will summarize the NATO summit that just concluded in the context of Ukraine security. Let's kick things off with a brief introduction to this topic.
NATO allies gather to show their support for Ukraine at the end of their 3-day summit. The 32 members have created a unified and comprehensive security architecture to support Ukraine both during war and peacetime.
In the short term, we'll continue to supply Ukraine with the weapons, munitions, and training they need to repel Russian forces. In the medium term, we'll help build a future force that has the strength and the capabilities both to defend Ukraine and deter further aggression. In the long term, after this war is over, if Putin ever tries it again, all the countries that endorsed the compact have pledged to have Ukraine's back.
President Zelensky, who in a momentary slip Biden referred to as Putin, welcomed the initiative.
This Ukraine compact we are forming takes our relations to a new level, a significant achievement for Ukraine and all of us. Slava Ukraini!
Earlier, the two leaders had held talks in which Biden provided a further $225 million in US military aid. Poland added its signature to the NATO drone coalition. Polish Defence Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz signed the memorandum alongside representatives from 12 other nations. The coalition aims to provide various types of drone to the Ukrainian military via donations and the manufacture of unmanned aerial vehicles designed specifically for Kyiv. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said the promise of F-16 jets fighting in Ukrainian skies this summer is fulfilled. A joint statement from the leaders of the United States, Denmark and the Netherlands said the Danish and Dutch governments were in the process of donating American-made F-16s to Ukraine. NATO says it will provide at least $43 billion in military aid within the next year. NATO members have also pledged to continue to support Ukraine on its irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership.
And joining us right now to talk more about this particular topic is Mr. Louis Wirenga, lecturer in International Relations of Baltic Defense College. Hello, sir, and
Hi.
Welcome to Ukraine This Week on TVP World. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
So we are looking at the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., and of course we do know the main focus is on Ukraine, and a new support package has been signed. Can you give us a scope of how significant that is?
This is the most significant of the 3 summits that have taken place since the second phase of Russia's war of conquest against Ukraine. So I think that the Ukrainians are largely satisfied with the results of the Washington summit. The language is very strong, and the alliance made real concrete steps forward. The two big takeaways when it comes from Ukraine is that NATO membership, the path is irreversible, and that there is now a bridge to bring Ukraine to eventual NATO membership. And the reason behind that is there's a clearer and more prominent understanding and sense that we really need to speed this up, because Russia will not stop with Ukraine. And there's also the understanding that what's going on with Russia right now is a warm-up of what will take place throughout the rest of the century. And that is a global issue. It's no longer limited just to Europe. So the path dependency between Russia and the PRC is highlighted, and this all relates. So you have the 40 billion euro financial pledge to Ukraine, and of course the Ukraine Compact, which is some 20 nations, most of them allied nations, but notably Japan is present, as well as the presidents of the European Council, Commission, and of course President Zelensky himself. And this Ukraine Compact will create a unified and comprehensive security architecture, which will support Ukraine now, but also into the future as they get ready to cross that bridge into eventual NATO membership.
Right. A lot of these plans that have been passed has long-term plans that requires years upon years of facilitation with Ukraine in order to be carried out. However, we do have to address the elephant in the room, which being, well, Joe Biden have committed a lot to Ukraine. However, there is a great unknown in whether or not this commitment can be sustained if we're looking at a different administration. Do you think the United States will stay on course when it comes to the support of Ukraine?
Yes, I do. And I can understand why that question is asked, and I can understand why people in Ukraine and also allies that are closer to the theater of conflict are starting to worry about that. There are two things that I want to make, well, really three things that I want to make clear about that. One, I do think that the United States, regardless of administration, is going to be in this for the long haul, especially for reasons that it is global. There is a connection with the PRC, there's a connection with Iran, there's a connection with North Korea, and there's a connection with Venezuela. And the alliance that we have in NATO is stronger because of our shared liberal democratic values. And the alliance, so-called the partnership agreement that these other countries have, is on the shared disdain for the United States and for the United States' liberal democratic partnerships. So it's not what holds them together, it's what brings them together, if you know what I mean. The second thing is that there is a shared understanding, regardless of political rhetoric, that the United States is stronger with our partners, and our partners are stronger with us. So there might be some rattling of heads about spending 2% or arguably more. I would say the next summit going forward in a year's time will probably come to the conclusion that it will be up to 3% or maybe even higher. But also that the United States tends to have Republicans in the Senate, and especially in the Senate, and the majority of the Republicans in the House who understands the nature of transatlantic relationships and understand the value of that. So a lot of what's going on now is rhetoric. It's not a guarantee, but I think that leads me to my third point, that European partners, since the second phase of Russia's brutal war of conquest against Ukraine began, have understood that they want to work with the U.S., they want to make sure that the U.S. always remains a firm ally, but that they also have to start taking security more seriously, and they have to ramp up for the 21st century conflict and the nature of what that would mean.
All right, sir. So when we're looking down this particular issue, there is a lot of discussion, like you mentioned, about Trump-proofing or future-proofing the NATO alliance's commitment. Do you think a lot of these rhetoric is actually somewhat a way to drive out more kind of investment into the military-industrial complex, saying that this NATO allies need to really ramp up their military spending and not over-rely on the United States? Or do you think some of the rhetoric maybe comes from a more political incentive?
Well, I certainly think that there's an element of both in there. I mean, President Trump has said recently that that was one of the things he was trying to do is awaken certain allies. I mean, we have 23 that have pledged that have already gotten to the 2%, and then we have others that have pledged to meet that at the recent Washington summit. So we're getting there, and I think that regardless of intention, real or perceived, that seemed to work because all of a sudden people thought, what's going to happen if we don't have the security umbrella that the United States has been providing for so many decades, and it's come back into the forefront now. Of course, some of it is campaign rhetoric, but I think the most important thing to remember about that is that in a person-focused political system where there's two parties, there's going to be a lot of rhetoric that is not intended for a domestic audience, and some of it is. Some of it's intended for a foreign audience. Most of it's intended for the domestic audience. And so reading into that is just a matter of speculation. But I also think that the really important thing that will probably give us a clear indication into the future is how global the discussion is right now and the way forward after the Washington summit. So this was the first summit where the Indo-Pac 4, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia were in the documentation. They had been coming to the summits as partners, and there's not going to be such a thing as global NATO. It's always going to be Europe and North America. But NATO has skin in the global game, and we share values with the four countries that I mentioned, and those four countries share security threats. So a lot of these things are linked. There's a clear path dependency between Russia and the PRC. And if you look at the rhetoric from the last Trump administration, they were very, very tough on China. And some of the policymakers that would likely be in a future second Trump administration are also talking tough on China. And in that sense, the U.S. will need allies going forward, because Secretary Blinken said for, I think, an article recently in Deutsche Welle that there is an interesting kind of shift from China, that they're trying to get better relations with countries in Europe, but not fueling up to the biggest threat to Europe's security. So they're supporting Russia in ways that allow the Russian war machine to continue. Well, that would indicate to me that they're trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and European allies. So that's something to look out for. And I do not think that a future Trump administration would take that very lightly.
All right. And one of the interesting phenomenon was whenever I discussed Ukraine aid with military personnel is that they always bring to the fact that a lot of these numbers are being touted around 60 billion, 40 billion, however many million. But a lot of times in the front line, it takes a significant amount of time for these to actually get to Ukraine. And they're always posing the question, when and how. Do you think organizationally there is a little bit of a structural issue when it comes to supplying aid to Ukraine, and the fact that they're now shifting the focus of organizing these supply to Ukraine in a more with this European ally instead of having the Americans do it, would actually facilitate that to be more efficient?
Well, I think it definitely would facilitate a higher level and a higher degree of efficiency. And that's one of the things that is being discussed and will continue to be discussed. And that just highlights the continuing need to deepen interoperability. And I was very pleased to see, I think as everyone who supports Ukraine and NATO, that the F-16s are coming, and they're coming this summer. And especially considering that the Netherlands and Denmark took point on that, along with the United States. And these are countries that are NATO allies and that are strong supporters of Ukraine, but are further removed from the theater. And so that's just one more indication out of many that that everybody understands the urgency of what's going on right now. And in addition to that, Belgium and Norway had committed to provide further aircraft. And so those two are Europe. Of course, Norway not in the EU, but still very much in Europe and very much a strong ally, always has been. And so this is something that I think is going to continue. And I think that another key element of the Washington summit is just the increased sense of urgency that is larger than the previous two summits since the second phase of the War of Conquest began.
Right, you brought up a very important term there, being interoperability, and I think that's also one of the incentives of having Ukrainians train in Poland. Do you think that this move going forward will actually be able to draw the center of gravity more of this NATO military alliance more to the eastern flank?
Well, I think that it is our geographical center of gravity right now. I mean, yes, NATO takes a 360-degree approach, and I think that both things can be drew simultaneously because there are things in the Arctic, there are things in the Mediterranean. I even mentioned the Indo-Pacific. But if we're looking at NATO soil and we're looking at the pledge and the ironclad promise to defend every inch of Allied territory, the center of gravity is very much the three Baltic states and Poland. And right now, also Finland, one of our two newest allies. So yes, I think that is already the case. And it's what you mentioned is just one more element to increase the truth behind that and the significance of these countries and how important they are to remaining intact in face of Russian aggression.
Right, and when you mentioned Finland and Sweden, we also see like a relatively quick accession due to their troop already being in a NATO standard and able to kind of cooperate, again emphasizing the interoperability. Do you think that Ukraine now being able to train with Poland as NATO ally will get them to the point where the interoperability will no longer be an issue going forward if Ukraine is to join NATO?
Absolutely. And that's a great point because Sweden and Finland had been everything but for several years. They've been training with NATO for quite some time. So they were all but name. And of course, the big elephant in that room was if you're all but name, Article 5 protection does not extend to you. So that is, the significance of Sweden and Finland becoming allied nations is absolutely tremendous. And I think, the best part about Ukrainian troops training in Poland is that it's not just support, it's a tremendous amount of support, but that is actually speeding up the process for their troops to be as interoperable as possible, because this bridge to membership and this notion that it's now not if, it is when, we don't know when that when's going to be, gives them that time and that urgency from now, from this day forward to whenever they become the 33rd allied country. They will be able to be interoperable with us. But also it goes the other way. I mean, their troops will likely be training allied troops because they have, as horrible as it is, they have the experience of actually fighting the Russians on their soil.
Right.
Very valiantly.
Very much so. And like you said, maybe all these with all this effort being put in, we can start to actually see this, so said, bridge being materialized. So thank you so much for unpacking all of these. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for being with us on Ukraine This Week.
My pleasure. Slava Ukraine.
Sir, thank you so much for helping us unpack all of this, and hopefully sooner rather than later, this bridge will begin to materialize. Appreciate it. Thanks again for being with us on Ukraine This Week. And with that, we conclude this edition of Ukraine This Week. I'll see you again same time next week. But in the meantime, stay tuned to TVP World.